الحمد لله الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. All praises are due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, and may His peace and blessings be upon His beloved Prophet, our leader, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and our beloved Prophet's family, his community, and his followers until the end of time. Today's khutbah is about stress. It's perhaps appropriate because standing in front of people and speaking is a stressful activity. So I'm going to be counseling myself as much as advising you today during the content of this khutbah. And the first step in dealing with stress, both the everyday stress as well as the occasional extraordinary pain that's part of living, is to understand the experience as well as understand the different ways that we experience stress and pain, the different roles within which we experience stress and pain. We experience it as individuals. We experience stress as spouses, as third parties, people that aren't related necessarily but are advisors or co-workers. And we experience stress most of all in the parent-child relationship. So today's khutbah is going to talk about how we can understand dealing with difficulties in all these different aspects of our lives. And the way we're going to look at it is through the examples provided to us in the Quran, and through the examples provided to us by Allah through the persons of our leaders in the past. Namely, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his example and his experience with the initial shock of revelation tells us how we ourselves as individuals can deal with stress. Subsequent to that, Khadija radiallahu anha's response to his experience tells us how, as spouses, men and women, we can deal with the stress that our husbands and wives face. Then the actions of Khadija take us to a third person in the story, Waraqa bin Nawfal, who was Khadija radiallahu anha's uncle and learned man. And his actions tell us how we can react as advisors, as friends, as co-workers, as third parties to people that are experiencing stress. And then inshallah, finally, we'll come to the example of the parent-child relationship. And Allah has given us a very beautiful example of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, and how they dealt with the stress of the sacrifice that Ibrahim alayhi salam was ordered to make by Allah. And the way they dealt with it will tell us a lot about how, as parents, we can deal with children, and as children, we can deal with parents that are undergoing and dealing with stress. And if you notice, I've covered almost every aspect of a community here, the different types of roles that are available in the community. Because think about it, you yourselves, you play these different roles within your family, and then you play the same role for other people in other families, and therefore you're a third party. And what this makes up, there's a modern term for it. It's called a social support network. It's basically a fancy term to describe a community of people that help each other. And all of these examples put together of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, of Khadija radiallahu anha, of Waraqah bin Nawfal, may Allah be pleased with him, of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, provide an example of a social support network and how their reactions provide an example of how a social support network should function. The second part of the khutbah, I'm sure you noticed, these are all people that are part of our religious history and tradition. So their reactions to stress are rooted in their faith in Allah and their belief. So if any conversation about dealing with pain and stress has to cover how to establish and solidify your iman and your faith, because that's what's going to help you deal with stress in times of difficulty. The tools that Allah has given us are basic, and He's outlined them to us through the example of the Prophet ﷺ and in the Quran. They are the Shahada, Salah, Zakah, fasting Ramadan, and Hajj. And I'm going to go into how exactly these tools are used and how you should perceive them in order to help them inculcate faith in your life, and how this will then help you deal with stress and pain. Now, the way we actually respond to stress is something that we should take a look at before looking at the examples of our holy people. Because you have to understand where you're at if you are trying to get to a better place. One of the things that's preached most often in times of stress is patience. So, God forbid somebody's family member dies, and the advice everyone has for them is, be patient, just be patient, it's okay. But unfortunately, I think a lot of times what's preached and what's conveyed is false patience. It's just patience on the face. And what it masks is anxiety and sometimes hysteria that's lurking underneath. So the methods that I'm going to talk about today, the examples that I'm going to talk about today, are trying to get at that stress and anxiety that's lurking underneath. They're not just meant to be words to tell you, just be patient. And what happens when you just paper over the stress that people are feeling is that stress and that pain, that anxiety that you're trying to cover up with the mask of patience can result in you lashing out at other people. So it comes out in different ways that can be self-destructive and destructive to those around you. And as I mentioned, we have to realize that patience is not an automatic state. Poise and humility, which are two characteristics that are essential to dealing with difficulties in life. Poise is calmness under pressure, and humility is understanding the limits of your own abilities, your strengths as well as your weaknesses. They don't come automatically to a person. They have to be cultivated or grown inside oneself over years of training. And this is what our way of life, Islam, this is what it's all about. And Allah has blessed us through Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and with an example of how to deal with all aspects of life. And sometimes we overlook the fact that the Prophet ﷺ himself felt pain in his life and felt anxiety. This man who was the greatest of all men, the greatest of all human beings, he actually himself felt anxiety and stress. And that's why I want to talk about his experience, his first experience of revelation, because it will tell us a lot about how we as individuals can understand stress and understand it, process it, and seek help. So Muhammad ﷺ's first experience of revelation. It's an extremely heavy trial. Allah mentioned in the Quran that if the Quran itself was revealed upon a mountain, the stress of that revelation would obliterate the mountain. And Jibreel alayhi salam put the stress of this revelation on one man, on Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So you can imagine the difficulty of enduring that type of experience. On top of that, Muhammad ﷺ had a practice before revelation of going to the cave of Hira and spending time in solitude and contemplation of the signs of Allah, nature. And we're going to come back to that later in the khutbah. So he was by himself in the cave. He was by himself when Jibreel alayhi salam appeared to him and overwhelmed him in his embrace and commanded him to proclaim. And the Prophet ﷺ responded as any human would, with bewilderment. He said, I can't read. Iqra means both read and proclaim. And he said, I can't read. And he was overwhelmed again in the presence of Jibreel alayhi salam. And he repeated again. He was commanded and he repeated again. I can't read. And the third time, he was overwhelmed in the embrace of Jibreel alayhi salam. And then Jibreel alayhi salam recited the first verses of Surah Al-Alaq to him. And the first verses in the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So Muhammad ﷺ is shaken out of his solitude in the cave of Hira by this otherworldly presence which squeezes him and then commands him to recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man which he knew not. And subhanAllah, even in the content of these verses, there is a lot that is instructing us on how to deal with the experience of living, and including living with stress and pain. And as Muhammad ﷺ had this experience, he ran down the mountain, he left the cave, and he's going down the mountain, and he's wondering if he's lost his mind. This, the greatest human being who walked on this earth, was stricken with such anxiety and doubt by this incredible experience that he was undergoing. But Jibreel alayhi salam reappeared to him in all of his glory and grandeur and instructed him that he is not possessed and he is not insane, that he is the messenger of Allah. And everywhere that Muhammad ﷺ looked, he could see Jibreel alayhi salam. And after that, he just went home as quickly as he could. And it wasn't automatic for Muhammad ﷺ, and this is a lesson that we can take for ourselves. His processing of what happened to him was not automatic. He had to go home, he went and he told his wife to cover him. He told Khadija radiallahu anha to cover him. And this actually, what he did next, tells us what we can do next when we are experiencing stress. He asked Khadija radiallahu anha, he told her what happened, and he asked her what her opinion is. Now, we can take this, definitely applies to all human beings, men or women. When you experience something very difficult, you failed an exam, right? You failed an exam, you came home, and you're sitting with that knowledge that you failed this and you might not pass this class and you need this class to graduate. And the reaction a lot of us may have is to hide that, to not share it, to take that burden all on yourself. But if the Prophet ﷺ himself sought out help, then it's not just okay for us to seek out help. We should seek out help from our loved ones and those that are around us. And not only should we let them know, the Prophet ﷺ asked Khadija radiallahu anha what her opinion was. And this is where we see the example of how we can behave as spouses. Because Khadija radiallahu anha did it, and as spouses, alhamdulillah, I'm married. And my wife is here, so I wouldn't say too much. But as spouses, it's easy for us to, wives and husbands, to reflect back our own stress at the pain and stress of our spouses. Reflect that back at them. So, I failed an exam, or my wife failed an exam, she comes home, she tells me she failed, and I'm like, oh my God, we're finished. This is it. Let's wrap things up. Maybe we can change our identities. It's a natural reaction because you hear about stress and you react to stress yourself. But Khadija anha's example shows us that we shouldn't, in fact, react to reflecting our own stress. The first thing that we need to do is comfort. Because she did. She put a blanket around the Prophet. She put a blanket around him and she reassured him that you are a good man. Allah Azza wa Jalla will not abandon you to being possessed or abandon you to insanity. This must be a blessing. At the same time, we shouldn't go overboard and tell the person that failed the exam, oh, forget the exam, doesn't matter, it's okay, no problem. You can work as a street sweeper, it's okay, it's a good honest job. Right? Not just excusing them that. But if you're trying to be an accountant or a doctor, you should keep on your goal. The point being that you should be realistic with the person you're speaking to. Be comforting and realistic. Because what did Khadija radiallahu anha do? She assured him, she told Muhammad that you will be okay. But then she went to Waraqah bin Nawfal. And this is when how to deal with stress as third parties comes in. She went to Waraqah bin Nawfal because she wanted to understand this experience better. She wanted to get more knowledge about what her husband, Muhammad was going through, so then she'd come back and counsel him better. And this is another thing that we can apply in our lives, going back to the exam example, for instance. That, you failed the exam, your wife comes and tells you that she failed. So now you should go and find out, okay, USMLE step 1, she failed it. How many times do you take it? Are you allowed to take it more than once? In a year, how many times do you take it? What do you have to do to study? So then, after you reassured her, you give her good advice. Because this is what Khadija radiallahu anha did. And Waraqah bin Nawfal, her uncle's reaction to Khadija radiallahu anha's advice, and Waraqah bin Nawfal's reaction to when Muhammad came to see him, instructs us a lot on how we as third parties, and this is what you might experience a lot in your life. Because, you're at work 8 hours of the day, so you're dealing with people that are not just your family, unless you own a family business, which is a whole other story. But even if you're in your own family business, you're out, you're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with people in society. So you're going to come in contact with their stress. And alhamdulillah, we as a big community, we're all friends with each other in many cases. So you come in contact with each other's stress. So Waraqah bin Nawfal, when he advises the Prophet ﷺ, he actually gives him advice to the best of his knowledge and ability, number one. And number two, he doesn't hold back on the truth. Number three, he does so very gently with compassion and kindness. Because what Waraqah bin Nawfal told Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is that you are indeed the messenger of God. So he told him the truth, number one. He didn't sugarcoat it, because the very next thing he told him is, you will be turned out by your people. Your people will turn against you. Obviously, this would be distressing for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was known as Alamin, who was so trusted in the community of Mecca. He might have been kind of, taken aback by this response. But Waraqah bin Nawfal didn't hold back. He told him the truth. At the same time, the third step, he did so with kindness and compassion, because he told him, you will be turned out by your people, but if I'm alive, I will support you. And he kissed him on the forehead. This tells us how we should behave with our friends and our co-workers when they are going through stress and difficulty. Give them the truth to the best of your knowledge and ability. Don't hide difficult aspects of what you're talking about, but do so with kindness. And the first part is really important, and I feel like I need to emphasize that, because our community, mashallah, we're full of really confident people, and who sometimes violate this first part, who just speak to the extent of their knowledge. So, subhanAllah, sometimes, the person who's taking the USMLE, will come to you and share with an uncle or a coworker that, I failed step one, And, or for instance, another very common example, somebody will come to you and say, I lost my job. And that person works in software or IT, and you don't know the first thing about software or IT. And what's the first thing you tell them? As far as I know, there's no market for IT. I think you should change careers. Study dentistry. Dentistry is really good. I'm a dentist. I know about dentistry. Go into dentistry. This is completely inappropriate advice, because you're speaking beyond your knowledge. You don't understand IT or software. And therefore, we need to keep this in mind with respect to advising people. Speak to the extent of your knowledge. Don't sugarcoat things, but do so with compassion. And I will, inshallah, sum this up in the second half of the khutbah. أقول قول هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم عذر الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So, just as a recap, the examples of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the example of Khadija radiallahu anha as a spouse, and Waraqah bin Nawfal as an advisor, give us the basics of how a social support network is set up in a community, how it should function, and how we as individuals should contribute to that and should act. That Muhammad ﷺ, number one, we should know that it's okay to feel stress and to be feeling anxiety, because Muhammad ﷺ himself felt stress and anxiety, as exemplified by his experience with the initial revelation. Number two, as individuals, we should seek support from our loved ones around us, as he did with Khadija radiallahu anha. Number three, as spouses, we should not reflect back our stress and anxiety. We should be supportive, and you should gain more knowledge about what our husband or wife is going through. And as third parties, we should respond to the extent of our knowledge. We should not sugarcoat things, but say things with compassion and with kindness. So inshallah, I did mention the examples of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam, but I'm a verbose person. As my friends know, I mentioned my wife earlier, so I can say that she has to suffer through this verbosity sometimes herself. So inshallah, in the next time I give khutbah, I'll go through the examples of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam and go through some of the other points that were down here. So we ask Allah to protect us and our families and give us the strength to come closer to Him. Allahumma اهدنا فيمن هديت ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا ربنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة